Over the past 3 decades, the Doom community has experienced both ups and downs, from the almost manic obsession of people who played the game for the first time, to the departure to the real underground, when the series was eclipsed by new games such as Quake, Counter-Strike, and Call of Duty. But even during the not-so-popular period, fans continued to create and do the impossible using the Doom engine as base. Most of their activities were pure initiative, for which instead of money, they received only recognition, often exclusively within the community, creating many source ports, map editors, levels of varying complexity, and even megawads, gameplay-changing modifications, holding LAN parties and championships, writing and translating books, and so on for many years. Even now, the community's achievements may seem enormous to an outsider, especially from the point of view of historical progression. But is this really so? It is impossible to present everything about the Doom community in one video, so we offer a documentary series. What is it like? Imagine a city library with encyclopedic publications on endless shelves. Let's go through the iconic moments of different eras, and we will start, of course, from the very beginning. Welcome to our documentary series called 3 Decades of Doom First Stop, the 1994 to 1996 era. Before we start, I want to present myself. Hey there. In the Doom community, you can find me under the nickname Dante. I'm one of the founders of Legacy Z, a portable LAN computer club that has been involved in organizing LAN events in Russia since 2018. One of the popular formats of our events is Russian DoomCon. Non-commercial organizations don't bring any profit otherwise. All these years, we haven't got any sponsorship, but let's not talk about missing an opportunity. Let's get back to Doom. My interest in Doom was sparked by our favorite game on PlayStation, Final Doom, which I was introduced to back in 2002. At that moment, I didn't think that this huge cultural layer of gaming history would become a hobby for me in the future. In 2010, I gained access to the internet and became a witness to the Skull Tag era. I encountered countless megawads and other modifications, rapidly changing the original gameplay. I wish I knew how much time was spent shooting demonic hordes during these times. Somebody knows me as the author of the following projects: PSX Doom, The Forgotten Chapter, Virus of Faith, and Voidness. I think everyone who joins the Doom community at least tries to create their own WAD using Doom Builder. Somebody else knows me as a participant in Doom duels and other tournaments in the community.
We're going to be watching, we're going to start off watching Dante, the combat specialist of the world. Already up 3-0 on Animal. Everything can shift in a game like Doom. Both players low on health. Dante gets it.
Unfortunately, the competitive scene is currently in a period of decline, but I would not give up on it. The Take the Crown series of tournaments was a striking example of an ascent, albeit short-lived.
At least he doesn't have a rocket launcher out this time.
Oh! Oh! Yo! What a shot, what a dodge. He was hugging that wall so tight. Like, suck it in, suck it in.
One of the reasons for creating the project called 3 Decades of Doom was the lack of content. On the video hosting site YouTube, there are quite a few videos related to the legendary franchise from ID Software, but how many of them are dedicated to the community's history? The first episode took a year to create. I'm not one of the skilled creators of video montages or authors of fundamental analytic articles. However, I tried to do what I could to create this piece of history that we appreciate so much. Furthermore, I hope you like it. Thanks to everyone who assisted me with this project. Doom has one of the most wholesome fan base across the world. Endless groups and the public and social media, a considerable number of members surround Discord servers, active forums, unlimited WADs, getting developed from time to time, event organizations, live translations, and IRL meetings for Doom fans. Counting these elements, it's the maintenance that forms the community itself, and it can take a long time, but where should we start the introduction? Starting with FTP servers, Usenet groups, thousands Usenet, a LAN meeting around deathmatch communities with tournament matches included. First created level editors, but let's keep the topic chronologically. Usenet is a worldwide distributed discussion system that is available on computers. It was developed from the general-purpose Unix to Unix copy dial-up network architecture. It was mainly used for conversation groups and publishing files across the net, but it was one of the main places where the Doom community was born, not without assistance from Hank Lockhart. He was an active user of the Usenet and the author of Doom Frequently Asked Questions, the first digital manual that was ever released, and the Doom Hacker's Guide, the first physical manual about the game, which contained information and hints about editing WAD files and creating the levels for the game using the level editors. The discussion about the Doom release started in the group Comp Sys, IBM, PC Games, Action. But after the release of the game, one group wasn't enough to keep the community, and then a group called Alt Games, Doom, was made with subgroup categories. John Van Essen is an organizer, programmer, and system administrator who was an early anchor of the Doom community from its inception in 1993 up to 1999. John organized the process to get the Usenet Rec Games, Computer, Doom hierarchy of news groups created. At the beginning of the 2000s, Usenet will be replaced by the forums and messengers due to the convenience of these following services. The early period of the community is not replete with websites. Most of them will appear towards the end of the 90s, representing the author's pages of the creators of WADs. But at first, interested Doom players mostly used FTP servers to exchange information. One of the oldest files archives is considered iDoom, which is now hosted on ftp.gamers.org and has many mirrors in different countries of the world to preserve the content. iDoom archive is one of 3 sister FTP archives for game add-ons, including a Quake Engine archive, iDoom 2, and an Unreal archive Unreal. Only the id Games archive accepts new uploads of the 3 archives, while the other 2 are closed, meaning Quake, Unreal archives. iDoom archive was founded by Barry Bloom in 1994 in order to create a centralized archive. Most of the files were collected from university FTP servers. iDoom have gone through quite a few owners, including one of the most famous members of the community, Ty Halderman. He held this position from February 1997 to April 2015. On July 31st, 2015, at the age of 69, Ty left the world due to cancer. Later on, the management of iDoom has been taken over by Bill Koch and Eric Baker. Now we can move on to the chapter associated with the appearance of the first map editors and other significant programs. So what is a WAD file used in Doom and other projects on its engine? It's a package file that stores the game's data and resources. Moreover, WADE is an acronym that, according to the Doom Bible, stands for Where's All the Data. WAD files are divided into 2 types. iWAD is internal or initial. WAD is the main file required for launching the game as intended by developers, which has all the necessary resources: levels, music, sounds, textures, sprites, and so on. PWAD is patch WAD, replaces or supplements original game content, and it requires to use the -file command to attach it to the game. Let's talk about how some data inside the WAD is interpreted by the engine. Technically, a level in Doom is literally a drawn map from top-down view. You can see it in Automap. The geometry of the levels consists of horizontal surfaces, sectors, and vertical surfaces that separate the sectors from each other and from the void outside the level. Line defs displayed as lines on the map, and that means that in the Doom engine, mappers couldn't create room over room or sloped planes, because they could only draw a flat, single-floor plan, at least in the early days of Doom modding. Such advanced features will only appear with the release of source ports. Line def is a line bounded at both ends by the vertices of the map. Vertex. It defines vertical planes, i.e. walls, on the level. Such a line can have from 1 to 2 sides called side-def, which carry information about textures. A wall is called one-sided if it separates the level from the empty outer space, and two-sided if there is a sector on both sides sides of it. A line can contain information about what should happen during an interaction, as well as a tag if the action needs to be performed elsewhere in the level. Line def with one-sided def can only use middle textures. In addition to middle textures, double-sided line defs can also carry information about upper and lower textures, which are displayed on the border between two sectors with different heights. Sector is a horizontal plane bounded on all sides by 3 or more lines. Sector defines surfaces, i.e. floors, ceilings, on a level. Each sector has a texture and height for the floor and ceiling, and can also have a special attribute related to gameplay or visuals called a sector effect. The first user editing tools for the Legendary game were quite primitive compared to today's ones. Fans developed them without the participation of ID software and without having source codes, documentation, commercial benefits, spending a lot of hours. But we'll start with the very first map editor, that one written by John Romero. Doomed is a map editor used by ID software to create maps for Doom, Doom 2, and the Ultimate Doom. It was written in Objective-C for the Next Step operating system. Let us recall that Doom used a non-standard and new rendering algorithm for video games at that time, which was introduced by John Carmack. Binary Space Partitioning, BSP. The Doom engine cannot render a level directly from geometry, although this information is enough. In order to draw a level quickly, it is necessary to break it into nodes and build a tree from these nodes. In order to build this tree, another tool is needed in addition to the level editor, which is most often simply called Node Builder. The structural components of the created map must be calculated in advance and saved in the WAD file itself. The very first Node Builder, written by ID Software during the development of Doom, was Doom BSP, which, like DoomEd, was written in Objective-C. Its source code was released in May 1994, but due to licensing issues, fans did not develop it, and there was no need to. By that time, other node builders had already been written. However, in the 1990s, the source code did not exist in public, and the editor's inaccessibility to fans served as a catalyst for a thorough analysis of the game's files and reverse engineering. Most Doom fans have probably never heard of Brendan Weiber and Raphael Quinet. In the mid-1990s, Raphael worked as an engineer for the famous Swedish company Ericsson. There is much less information about Brendan, but it is known that he lived in New Zealand. They were the ones who took the first step towards mapping in Doom and made invaluable contributions to the community. Doom Editing Utilities, abbreviated as DEU, is considered the very first full-fledged, fan-made level editor for Doom. It was originally developed and published by Brandon on January 26, 1994, just a month and a half after the game's release. Later, Raphael also joined the development of DEU. The editor played the role of a pioneer, so the first versions only allowed editing existing maps and not creating them from scratch due to the lack of a node builder. Version 5.21, released 6 months later, was the last official version, but also became the basis for a whole family of map editors written in the C and C++ programming languages. Unfortunately, it only supported the first Doom with 3 episodes. By the time Doom 2 was released, Quinet and Weiber had little interest in updating their creation. They only managed to port it from MS-DOS to Windows. The version supporting Doom 2 was already unofficial. In DEU, you need to switch between modes for creating lines, sectors, placing objects, assigning textures, and actions. These modes are used in almost all modern editors. Death Doom Editor for total head cases is based on DEU 5.21, released in 1994. Its developers are Anthony Burden and Simon Oak. The editor already supported Doom 2. Later, Jim Flynn modified the editor for the Boom port, as did Randy Height, who did a similar thing, only for his own ZDoom port, calling the modified version of the utility ZETH. We will talk about the map formats that appeared in the second half of the 90s in the next episode. Death developed most actively in the period from 1995 to 1998 and was popular everywhere. Doom Construction Kit, aka DCK, is a level editor for MS-DOS, created by Ben Morris, Warbaby, in mid-1994. It is written in C++, and just like DEU, has different editing modes. Its development was carried out over the next 2 years. Starting with version 2.2F, it becomes a paid version, but most mappers will continue to prefer the free versions. Ben is known to have worked at Valve on Worldcraft, now known as Valve Hammer Editor, but left in 1998. date. He has also been associated with game development company Xerius Development. At the time of 1995, DCK supported Doom, The Ultimate Doom, Doom 2, and Heretic, and since February 1996, also Hexen, although initially it was planned to release a separate editor for the latter called the Hexen Construction Kit. DP, Doom Enhanced Editor Program, is a commercial-level editor and WAD resource manager developed by Jack Vermeulen and published by Sensor-Based Systems, Inc. in August 1994. It was originally developed as an add-on for the DEU called DX. Subsequently, DP will become the basis for another, initially commercial-level editor, Deep Sia, the latest version of which, now free, was released in 2023. Deep was one of the first editors that, instead of a simple list, introduced a kind of browser for selecting textures. Matt Tagliaferri's DoomCAD level editor was probably the first to implement 3D map previews. It is claimed that it was quite slow and only displayed map geometry without textures. Now let's move on to the structure of WAD files and what tools were needed to work with it. LUMP is a structural unit, a single file of data inside a WAD. It can be anything, such as textures, music, sprites, sounds, demos that play when idle in the menu, etc. LUMP name cannot contain more than 8 characters. As with map editors, there was no software to edit Doom's resources or mechanics. Enthusiasts had a great desire to break down the game that was modern at that time and change it to their liking. Greg Lewis, Dennis Miller, and Olivier Montanui will pave the way for the authors of an incredible number of modifications, including the cult Aliens TC, A Fistful of Doom, and Star Wars Doom. Dehacked is an editor for the Doom executable file, originally developed for Vanilla Doom. The first version was released on June 19, 1994, and was written by Greg Lewis in C++ under DOS. As a result of its work, Dehacked created a new executable file based on Doom.exe called Doomhack.exe, with changes that were written in the date file. With the release of source ports like Boom or ZDoom, Doomhack.exe was no longer required. But until 1998, total conversions like A Fistful of Doom either had their own installer or batch files required to run on Vanilla Doom. With Dehacked, anyone could take a monster from the game and replace its movement speed, attack, or health. It was also possible to change the parameters of the player and his arsenal. By adding a Deach file to the game, your chain gun could shoot rockets, a swing of your fist could release a BF ball, and a simple imp would come at you with so much health points that a cyber demon could only envy. DoText by Olivier Montanui and New WAD Tool by Dennis Miller were the first resource editors for the game. Using them, users could replace textures, monster sprites, player, and weapons. The Windows 3.1 version got a graphical interface and was renamed as Wintex. You can already notice some visual similarities with its more modern counterparts. Most players did not have the internet connection or a subscription to the Dwango service. The only way to fight someone in Doom was at a LAN party. The desire to increase gaming skill was constant. Most likely for this reason, various training mods for the game were created. BFG Hack was a mod that added Grey Marines with huge health pools to D2M1. They replaced the zombie men. Their placement on the map offered the player to hone the attack with the BFG tracer. After the plasma ball hit the target, after the next 16 ticks, 0.457 seconds, a second attack is calculated with 40 invisible tracer beams. They hit opponents at an angle of about 90 degrees, calculated from the player's current line of sight. In skillful hands, the attack became truly formidable. In many cases, the damage from such a shot exceeded the entire possible health points reserve of the enemy. Another type of training mods could be fast-running opponents with a large amount of health points and attacking the player, often with firearms. These enemies were called bots. Not a single competitive computer game is complete without cheats. Doom suffered the same fate. Unfortunately, little information remains about the various tricks of players of those years. There was an aimbot for Vanilla Doom 2V 1.9. This cheat made it possible to automatically aim at the enemy, which gave an advantage both in close combat and for detecting an opponent from a long distance. Most likely, in order to use it, the executable file Doom2.x was replaced. No Red cheat for the network game was based on changing the PlayPal lump and was used by the cheater under the guise of P-Wade without any agreement with the opponents. When receiving damage, the cheater's screen did not turn red. PlayPal is a color palette used in the game. Another possible cheat could be changes in IWAD or PWAD with sounds. Through certain manipulations, it was possible to achieve the effect of silent BFG, a bug that occurs by blocking the sound of a shot from a BFG by pressing on the wall at the same time. The automatic SR50, based on modified mouse drivers, allowed constant movement with maximum acceleration across the map. The SR50 itself is not a cheat, but the same cannot be said about its automation. The number of resources and guides for mastering the above programs on the internet cannot be compared with our time. A full-fledged 3D mode for map editors in which you could move around the map, changing the values of sectors and surface textures could only be dreamed of. The creators of many editors with utilities have completely taken an uncharted path. Thanks to their work, much of the foundation of the entire Doom community was laid. Indeed, when playing Doom for the first time, you thought about creating your levels in the style of this universe, or something completely new. As soon as the first DEU map editor appeared, many people immediately began transferring their homes, schools, universities, or places of work to Doom level using the functionality of the ID Tech engine. One such work was called the Unholy Trinity, which was claimed to be one of the top 10 WADs of 1994 by Doom World. It was most likely the first level to use photorealistic textures. The level's basis was taken from a real prototype, Holy Trinity College, part of the University of Cambridge in the UK. In addition to textures, a MIDI version of Bach's most famous composition was added to the level. The project's authors were three, probably students of the same educational institution: Steve McCrea, Simon Wall, and Caveman. Caveman contributed to creating his own software that affected the procedure CHT check cheat in the doom.exe file. It decrypted cheat code commands. On December 15, 1993, Caveman released the program to their Usenet group. Programmer Dave Taylor from ID contacted Caveman to try to understand how he managed to create this software. Most of the community tried to create levels for Doom 1 in 1994. PWAD's architecture at that time was simple, but never lacked aesthetics. Of course, most levels were corridors with primitive arenas, without any severe and multiple surroundings with complex geometry. Mappers were only getting a hand of it, and some of them managed to learn the basis of mapping sufficiently. Some wanted to create a simple arena with a cyber demon without any additional tweaks. In some places, we could come across a huge number of false walls. There were doors with such textures that your brain refused to associate them with the mechanics. You can notice one feature of the WADs of that time that was used very often. With the release of Doom 2, some of them received an update. A double-barreled gun, Mancubus, Archvile, and other monsters that ID software brought with the new game could be added to the map. One example of such projects is Dante's Gate and Crossing Acheron by the author John Anderson, Dr. Sleep. You probably encountered his maps while playing an official expansion pack, Master Levels for Doom 2, which was included for PC and PS1 ports. After the release of Doom 2, John updated his maps, changing not only items, but also some textures. Between making the level for Doom, Dr. Sleep was a writer. That's why the element of literature of the Middle Era, especially Canto, was used in his Inferno series. 9 maps, 9 cantos, 9 circles of Hell from Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy. Each map was released at a different time. They were connected to the plot, but they never were combined into a single WAD. According to the text files, John rewrote the story of Dante and Beatrice in the style of Doom. The first 2 cantos were released as a single work. Levels from 3 to 7 were included in AID, the master levels. W8. 8th map was included for the 4th episode of the Ultimate Doom, Thy Flesh Consumed. The latest canto hasn't been released since then. After the release of Doom, Dr. Sleep was 37 years old. He was interested in politics and Lovecraft's work and worked in a funeral home as a wedding photographer and in a grocery store. Having connected his life with computer games, he collaborated with ID Software. He later took part in work on Daikatana at Ion Storm and on Unreal at the then Epic Mega Games. He was married twice and played guitar and piano. In 2018, he died of pneumonia, leaving a mark in the history of Doom as one of the pioneers in mapping. Compared to the bestiary and weapons of Doom 2, the gameplay component of Doom and the Ultimate Doom will seem more straightforward and less dynamic. Taking down barons with a simple shotgun is less fun than a double-barreled shotgun. Pain elementals and archviles force the player to take them out as fast as possible from the monster group of Doom 2 due to their unique battle mechanics. For the following reasons, authors decided to adapt their maps according to this dynamic, adding more variety during fighting encounters. One category of WADs from 1994 presented a whole episode, changing one of the original episodes of Doom. Mostly, it was typical maps without any graphics added. Bjorn Hermans and Holger Nathrath created a trilogy of episodes with a chronology, Serenity, Eternity, and Infinity. In terms of architecture, they seem to be simpler than other projects of their colleagues in the community during that era. But here, the authors managed to balance quantity over quality here. However, does it mean that they are not playable now? In 1994, the term walkthrough with a pistol start wasn't very popular. Most players during this era tried to collect all the items without resetting the level. Pistol start was one way to beat the game, or a level at least. It's mostly used as an additional challenge during the walkthrough or for testing purposes to check the balance of the map itself. The mappers of that early period did not always consider this, and poor balance could disadvantage players while beating a certain level. You were supposed to pick up the weapon throughout the episode. For example, the final map of Eternity E2M8 is simply impossible to complete with a pistol start. Some of the works of that time were based on movies, books, and even comics. From the United Kingdom, we'll be transferring to the Czech Republic, where Pavel Hodek, a mapper who has written a single WAD, Galaxia, and created H2 HXMAS levels, will be introduced. During the creation of Galaxia, Pavel Hodek was inspired by a Czech comic, which was released in the mid-1880s and also called Galaxia. The plot tells the story of an astronaut whose ship passes through a black hole and lands on a previously unknown planet. Local humanoid species are exiled or killed by large spiders. Of course, Pavel didn't bother changing the enemy's sprites, which turned out that many spider masterminds were placed as giant spiders at the levels. The map itself presents a technological base with a metro station. You can meet voodoo dolls, player start actors, somewhere. The author most likely wanted to visualize the humanoid species from the comic. The song in the WAD had a pretty memorable tune to listen to. Also, a new texture and changed skybox can be noticed. By 1994 standards, the author did a great job. His version of E1M1 plays well even today and does not feel like something old. E1M9 causes a feeling of claustrophobia. A second project that was created in 1994, based on a third-party universe, produced the effect of a bomb exploding that year, of course, after Doom itself. Justin Fisher, under the pseudonym Harlequin, released the very first total conversion in the history of the community, Aliens TC. After 6 months of dedicated work, Justin's project practically tripled in quality due to the release of new versions of Doom and the Deathtag program. He could not even imagine that his project would acquire cult status. Even after the release of Doom 2, discussion about Aliens TC didn't slow down. The very next day, after publishing the topic on the Usenet network and indicating his mailbox address, Justin spent about 5 hours reading all the mail. Aliens was the first DUOD where almost everything was was redesigned: sprites, weapon models, sounds, enemies, and their behavior. In addition, Alien TC was the first to push the horror element of the Doom engine to the maximum. From the tense situation on the first level, where there are no opponents, to closed spaces with strangers suddenly appearing from everywhere, not every WOD of that time could boast of such a radical change in gameplay. In an interview for Doom World, Fisher revealed that he was pretty famous for LAN gatherings and that people asked him to criticize their levels. DreamWorks Interactive offered Fisher a job, which Fisher declined because he wanted to finish his education. He was completely burned out after creating Alien TC. After graduation, Justin got a job at Mad Genius Software, which also developed games. At the time of 1994, an unimaginable number of levels appeared, half of which today cannot be found on the internet. A considerable amount of resources was lost, including the contents of FTP servers. Some WODs have not gone beyond the scope of Usenet networks at all. One of the old-timers of the Doom community, Time of Death, goes through some of these WODs on his YouTube channel. In over 240 issues, he only made it to mid-1996 WADs. It is worth noting that some level authors with similar creativity paved their way into game development. Some managed to work with ID Software, and others ended up at Valve and other companies. This is just one of the reasons why Doom is a real phenomenon, and more than just a game. The very first megawad in the history of the community is currently considered to be NJ Doom, authored by the Scotsman Nigel NJ Rowand. All 3 original episodes, including the secret maps, have been changed. Rowan's latest works are dated 2020. In addition to WODs, he also wrote his training course on working with Deathtag. Return to Phobos by Michael Kelsey is a more meaningful work in design and gameplay. WAD, which replaces the entire first episode, is less demanding for the player using pistol start. Otherwise, everything looks like additional levels in the style of the first Doom. The same goes for works from the Innocent crew, Slaughter Until Death and The Evil Unleashed. Later, members of this team, 2 brothers, Dennis and Thomas Meller, took part in the creation of the Memento Mori duology, released the Obituary Megawatt, and created a collection of deathmatch maps called Point Blank. By the way, the latest work in the Point Blank 8 series remains in demand to this day at various tournaments. The brothers, having started their journey with modding for Wolfenstein 3D, contributed to Requiem and HACX. Subsequently, they began modding for Quake 1 and 2. One of the first known WODs is considered to be Origwad from Jeff Bird, dated March 7, 1994. It consists of 2 rooms connected by a door, several monsters, and an exit button. One can question the fact of its pioneering because DEU authors could try to create some maps themselves to test the editor. The entire month of March was a month whole of experiments. The progress achieved by the end of the year was impressive. CD collection creators were able to take advantage of this and earn extra money. At that time, there were various mapping competitions. Magazines like PC Zone often mentioned Doom, the installation of PWADs, coverage of tournament events, and such.
Hey Dantas, hey buddy, I hope you're doing today good, nice. This is your buddy Nico from the University Publicity.
Hi.
Do you mind if I can ask you a few questions?
Okay.
I had a DoomCon in honor of 14th anniversary of the franchise of the last one, right?
Yeah.
You know, that Doom is not just a game, it's culture phenomenon, right?
Well, yes.
Do you know the legendary quote by John Carmack that uploaded with the game just like uploaded the port film? It should be, but it's not necessary. It's your probably favorite quote, is that right?
Yes.
Have you seen Brutal Doom? It's just so awesome, oh dude. Blood, sex, guts. Have you played it?
Yeah.
What's your favorite level for Doom from the ID Software? Let me guess, it's gonna be 1E1, right?
Probably.
That's so great. Cool, nice. It was a great and you legend. Thank you. Nico from the Public University was with you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Doom is the world's first FPS game to become an esports discipline. Its role in the development of computer games and world tournaments cannot be overestimated. We don't know for sure, but it's unlikely John Carmack knew the impact Doom's online modes would have on the world. Just like co-op, Deathmatch allowed for up to 4-player battles on levels with pre-arranged deathmatch starts. In Doom Patch 1.4, the -Alt-Death command was introduced, providing another option to fight against each other. If you played Standard Deathmatch 1.0, then weapons remained in place after being picked up by a... Now let's move on directly to the maps. If it weren't for the ability to edit and create new WADs for Deathmatch, it's unlikely that people would still be playing Doom. In the 90s, the internet was not as widespread as it is now. Local deathmatches could only be held on classic IWA-D. However, there is no doubt that most of them are not suitable for this purpose. From Doom 1, it could be E1M1, maybe also E2M8 and E3M8. The first Doom 2 map is still in demand and played in tournaments. Its endless variations still continue to appear like mushrooms after rain. Map 07 was a slightly different story. Its remake into REAL7, later known as Dwango 5 Map 07, became more relevant. Only hit-scan weapons remained on the map. From TNT Evolution, only Map 01 made it into Dwango collections, but the levels from the Plutonia experiment didn't make it at all, as they weren't very suitable for deathmatch. At the time of 1996, there were many more suitable works besides iWADs. There is sometimes confusion in the Doom community how to differentiate between maps with the original name in their original form and the build in which these maps were included, and who are their authors. Let's take, for example, the legendary deathmatch and dual map Dwango 5 Map 01. In the original version of the map, the texture with the inscription Dwango 5, compiled by Aikman, was missing, as was the abbreviation D5M1 in general. San Jose College student Brett McLean, known as Rocked, created the first version, and John Pooch, known as Asmo, edited the WAD. The DEU editor was used to create the level. Unfortunately, just recently, Rocked reported that ASMO has left this world. Lance Lancaster, previously mentioned Aikman, included the map in the Dwango 5 map pack. And that's just the story of one level that was lucky enough to become popular. Thousands of different WADs have their own stories behind. Thus, the assembled 24-level megawad called Dwango 5 consists of the following previously released maps. After collecting these levels, he sent them to the rest of the project members in Dallas through the BBS, the wall disc, which was run by Neil Lopez. Having collected 7 Dwango compilations, Lance Lancaster has retired from the Doom community. Other interested people picked up this baton. In total, we received 13 regular packs, as well as WADs tied to one or another server. Also among the authors of levels of those years, it is worth mentioning Brian Venata under the nickname Stragonal, who made maps not only for Deathmatch, but also for Deathtag. He is responsible for the little-known Igor series, the popular Danzig 1 and Danzig 2 series, and of course, the Judas-branded levels. He later moved to the Quake community, where he released Judas 24. After that, nothing more was heard from him. Cole Savage, under the nickname Mancer Smoke, created the Mancer series of maps. His works have appeared in the Classics collections. As a member of Team TNT, he created one of the levels for the Grievance Megawad. He also created 2 maps for the Requiem Megawad, but for some reason, they were not included in the release version. Soon, Cole also went into the Quake community and created a remake of Mancer X Map 01 for Doom 3. He later returned with a collection of levels. Mancer XX, Robert Boyer from Canada, under the nicknames The Dweller in the Cellar and Gigabob, created collections of levels Dweller 1 and Dweller 2. The difference between the second part and the first is only 3 additional maps. Also worth mentioning is the British Doom League, BDL, led by Danny Lancashire, Demon Slayer, and Stuart McKendrick, Yeti. Their collections of maps, Brit 9, 10, 11, have been repeatedly in demand at competitions and are generally quite famous. The same cannot be said about the British tournaments, about which there is no information. The Point Blank map series by the Innocent Crew was quite popular, especially maps numbered 3 and 8. They were included in various collections, and they managed to remain in demand today, and these are just a few of the WODs reviewed. Over the past 3 decades, we have thousands of maps for playing Deathmatch, each of which has its own story. However, only a few of them are used in championships. An even larger number of levels are simply forgotten or completely impossible to find on the internet. Speedrun is a high-speed completion of a level in order to set a record and write a list of commands used per ticks in the Doom engine in the form of a demo file in LMP format. Tick is a time interval equal to 1/35 of a second. This type of competition is almost as popular as deathmatch battles. LMP files were small enough to be uploaded to an FTP server or written to a floppy disk or sent in UUE format. Typically, they weighed less than a megabyte. For example, a complete walkthrough of Doom 2 on Nightmare in cooperative mode for 2 players lasting 37.5 minutes is 686 kilobytes, and a deathmatch for 4 players lasting almost 17 minutes on the Dweller 2 map 11 map takes up 545 kilobytes of disk space. Now let's list the various tricks that have found their constant use in competitive modes. Strafe running is the increase in movement speed at an angle by summing the forward and sideways movement values. The movement method called SR40 and SR50 increases your speed by an average of 28 to 41% and requires a set angle of 38.6 to 38.7 to 45 degrees. Wall running is the acceleration of the player by moving along a wall from south to north or from west to east. Glide is a trick that involves breaking the linear progression by slipping through barred doors, narrow spaces, line-activated actions, and even walls. Let's run through the speedrun categories. UV/NM speed is a speedrun of level on ultra-violence or nightmare difficulty. The only requirement is to complete the map. UV max is completing a level with 100% kills and secrets. Though lost souls are not required for statistics, the resurrected monsters by Archviles must be killed. It's impossible to record such a demo on nightmare difficulty, but there is NM 100S, where you need to complete the level with all the secrets. UV Pacifist is the completion of a level without causing direct or some indirect damage to the enemy. UV Tyson is, as you might guess, named after the famous American boxer. However, in addition to the fist, the player can use a chainsaw and a pistol to achieve 100% kill. UV Fast and UV Respawn is a walkthrough with the mentioned parameters. Fast monsters or their respawn after a certain time requires at least 100% kills and secrets. MMH, Maximum Minimum Health, was a Compet N speedrunning category that is no longer maintained. The object is to finish the level in ultra-violence with the highest maximum minimum health possible. The earliest known speedrunning website is considered to be the LMP Hall of Fame, created by Christina Strunoff Norman in January 1994. There is very little information about it due to its short existence and being eclipsed in May 1994 by Frank Staiano's Doom honorific titles, DHT. The DHT itself was a rating system for awarding titles to players whose playthrough demos were posted in the archives. There were 6 DHT competitions. The DHT titles were Doom Master, a player who can complete any level on ultra-violence. Doom Grand Master, a player who can complete any level on Nightmare. Doom Tyson, a player who can complete any level on ultra-violence with 100% kills, using only fist, pistol, and chainsaw as weapons. Doom Grandass Kicker / Doom God, a combination of the 3 titles above. Over time, several new categories have been proposed, such as Pacifist and Realist. During the existence of DHT, from 1994 to 1999, 1997, the demo scene expanded significantly, while the number of Doomers around the world steadily decreased. Besides Compat N, the demo scene has always been a mishmash of different demos scattered all over the internet. Another characteristic feature of LMP files of those years is the author's performance of their own dance in the form of movements at the very beginning of the level. This was done for identification reasons. In those years, the possibility of passing off other people's runs in Doom as your own was not something rare. Compat N is probably one of the most significant birthplaces of speedrunning in the 90s. Starting as a database that moved from one FTP server to another, it was founded by Simon Widlake in November 1994. Later, Istvan Pataki would take over from Simon as he became busy with other things. After several owners, the Compat N source code was transferred from Laura Herman, Bodko, to Zvonimir Buchanich, FX, in May 2012. The database was available as a website at doom.com.hr. Now, this famous resource, due to the lost interest of its owners, is documented by Franz P. de Vries, /Zwimp, and is in a read-only state. Frank Stajano, DHT founder, and Doug Merrill, Opulent, as one of the authors of the articles 10 Years of Doom, will describe the H2H International Doomers competition as a rather controversial competition among players. Mark Gundy from the BBS TUS H2H in May 1995 announced a 3-month competition, the winners of which will receive various prizes. According to the text files, the sponsors of the H2H IDC were the following companies and associations of those years: Advanced Gravis, a manufacturer of sound cards and gamepads; Brady Games Publishing, a publishing company from the USA; Conquest Software were the creators of the launcher for running PWADs, Ultra Launch, H2H Battle Station 1. Unfortunately, there is almost no information about this gaming service. Did it really exist? If we had managed to connect to the H2H BBS back then, perhaps we could have learned more about this online play feature in Doom. The ads only give away a few bits of information, 5 free days of use, and then $10 for 25 hours. Most likely, many were jealous of the stunning success of Dwango. Pacific Media Walks, a publisher of the commercial compilation Megadoom 2. Sam's Publishing provided the book Tricks of the Doom Programming Gurus with an accompanying CD as a prize. Sirius Software, an owner of software for online game and Descent. Walnut Creek Sidrom, one of the major FTP servers. Stonehenge BBS. The main author of the maps for the contest was Dave Swift, aka Mud. Later, those maps will be included in the H2H XMAS Megawad. According to Frank Stajano, he won one of the prize places, but never received what was promised. Having repeatedly contacted the organizers of the competition and written about it in one of the news feeds on the Usenet network a year later, he learned that other finalists also remained without prizes. However, opening one text document, shortlist to you, we will find him only in 37th place. Therefore, his statement can be completely refuted. Players from different countries also took part in this event. H2H competitions, megawads, and their activities, after QuakeCon 1996, ceased to exist because the Wizard Works, under whose wing this group of people existed, was sold to GT Interactive Software. It's worth mentioning the speedrunners from the early days of the Doom community. Jonathan Hoof, Hunter, he won 12 Doom honorific titles, DHT, in 1995. George Bell, he discovered a way to pick up a BFG through a wall on the E4M2. Perfect Hatred map in the Ultimate Doom Kai Uwe Humpert, Gazelle. Richard J. Schaum passed away 10 September 2006. Andreas Anthi, Kren Daniel Lindgren, Demon Lord, Jonathan Donner, ZNB Zem. A little later, speedrunners of the so-called second wave will join them. Stefan Rini. Udluft, he is credited with popularizing the pacifist category and being the first player to complete the Shores of Hell episode in the NM100S category. Anders Johnson, Frank Siebers, alias Jesus, Adam Williamson, Henning Skogstu, Thomas Pilger, Ponter, Brad Spencer, Vorpal, Sam Woodman, Metabolist. The early era, in addition to famous players, also boasts the first cheaters. As a result, their cheating gave impetus to speedrunners who tried to record a complete run on Nightmare through all the levels of the Doom or Doom 2. Uwe Gerlich developed a whole whole set of tools called the Little Movie Processing Center for editing demos. Stefan Winterfeld was the first player to upload the very first demo with a complete playthrough of Doom 2 on Nightmare difficulty in May 1996. By the end of the year, the authenticity of this run was questioned and discredited from Comp.N. The first honest Doom 2 speedrun on Nightmare will be the run by Thomas Pilger, Panther. This will happen only on October 15th, 1998. Next time, we'll put a big emphasis on Anders Johnson and Jonathan Donner, who will make incredible contributions to the Doom scene. Also, TAS demos will not be left out. After 1996, the most iconic megawad for speedrunners will appear. The quality of completing levels will increase, and new records will not take long to come. Dwango, dial-up, wide area network games operation, is the first paid service for multiplayer games in Doom, Doom 2, and Heretic. It also supported Duke Nukem, Warcraft 2, Hexen, Descent 2, Strife, MechWarrior, and other games later. Even at the time of the release of Doom 2, online games were carried out within the same room, with the exception of the option of modem connections via BBS. Bob Huntley and his business partner, Key Kimbrell from Houston, could hardly imagine that within a year, the first esports championship in first-person shooters would be held with the support of ID Software and Microsoft thanks to their small gaming service. In 1994, they were just thinking about the possibility of connecting with players across the street, the neighbor city, or even in the neighbor state by creating a server. At first, Key got hooked on the game, and Bob was extremely dissatisfied with the lazy work of the employees who also played Doom. But after Huntley tried Deathmatch, he seemed to see the light. Producing interactive panels for gas stations has become a routine, and Doom managed to attract his attention. If it weren't Key's idea of connecting through telephone lines, there is no thought what the Doom community would have turned out. He wrote the utility in 5 weeks, while Bob tried to contact ID Software to no avail. The party in New York at the Limelight Club on the occasion of the release of Doom 2 became a landmark for these two businessmen. The only way to get to the event was to participate in a tournament where Key and Bob were given t-shirts of participants in the wrong sizes, and then they lost in the first rounds because they were newbies and also had a few drinks at a bar across the street. Jay Wilbur brushed them off, but John Romero accepted their floppy disk with the program. Back to Dallas, John played a death match with Key, who was in Houston at the time, almost 400 kilometers, the first match in history at such a long distance. Although ID Software was skeptical, Jay Wilbur made a deal where they received 20% of the proceeds. Romero helped with the project, and on December 23rd, 1994, along with the shareware version of Heretic, the Dwango program was uploaded to an FTP server.
The latest breakthrough in online gaming is here. Welcome to the Dwango service. All the greatest games, all the greatest experiences, all the same program. Play Doom, Doom 2, and Heretic for the low price of $13.65 per week before tax.
You think you have what it takes to be a Dwango master? Show us by logging on and dominating.
Purchase your very own copy of Heretic and you will receive the free trial, which gives you 30 hours of free playtime.
On house.
Do you have what it takes to be a Dwango master? Show us your might.
The very next month, 10,000 people paid a subscription for $8.95 per month, and the expansion of the service was not long in coming. Server placement and franchise cost $35,000, representing a computer with several modems. Bob and Key were helped by Adrian Carmack's friend Mike Wilson, who traveled around the country with them. According to available information, Dwango servers appeared in many states of America, and subscribers even from Italy and Australia connected to them. By 1996, Dwango branches had opened in Japan, Singapore, and South Korea. Now, it's time to move on from David Kushner's Masters of Doom. While Dwango executives were developing the network, someone had to monitor the state of the servers themselves and moderate them. The very first moderator in Houston was HD Rambo. By the way, he remained so until the very end of the service in the States in 1998. From time to time, you can meet him on Z-Demon servers. But let's return to Dwango itself. Players received only 5 game hours per month. Additional time was purchased with money, and the subscription price was constantly changing. At the end of the server's existence, the tariffs were as follows. There was also a conditional rating system that awarded status depending on the number of hours the player spent on the servers. As a result, the service worked as a way to play online until October 1998 and was subsequently supplanted by competitors, Kali and Doom Connector, leaving Doom behind, and Player.com, 10 and Heat.net, the release of the first Quake, as well as the agreement between Interactive Visual Systems and Microsoft to create the Internet Gaming Zone. They greatly influenced businessmen from Houston in December 1997. Today, Dwango remains a subsidiary Dwango company in Japan, which is still involved in the media business by running the video hosting site Nikoniko. Bob Huntley still receives interest from it. Most players who came after the advent of network source ports could remember collections of maps rather than the service itself when they hear the word Dwango. However, if it weren't those two from Houston, who knows what multiplayer Doom would have become. During the Doom's multiplayer popularity and Dwango itself, there were other online services for the multiplayer experience. For example, one of them simulated a local network through which it became possible to play using the IPX protocol at a distance. TCP's setup was written by a Doom fan, Jake Page, replaced the original IPX setup, and allowed players to communicate using IP addresses through IRC, Internet Relay Chat. This method of playing online turned out to be very popular, but being free program at that time was extremely lacking in stability to hold the connection with the people. Scott Coleman and Jay Cotton met each other on the channel number Doom via IRC. Both of them encountered a few issues with TCP's setup. During the conversation, Jake Page shared open source with Scott of his program. Scott and Jay found various problems during the work with the program. Jake received feedback on which Scott didn't receive an answer. At first, Coleman and Cotton wanted to improve the performance of TCP setup. In the end, they wrote the iDoom for MS-DOS, which was more optimized from crashes during the session, and according to the authors, had a simpler interface. The first version of the utility dates back to September 23, 1994, 3 months before the release of Dwango. However, Scott and David did not have any support from ID Software. iDoom was renamed iFrag in mid-January 1995 when an update introduced Heretic support. iFrag, Frag Tracker, allows people to play Doom, Doom 2, and Heretic against others across the internet. It had a lobby function where players met and communicated before the match. Unfortunately, very little information has been preserved about the program. Until the end of March of that year, their creation remained free and was popular among the players, who were mostly students of American educational institutions. Tournament event called iFrag Doom College. 1996 passed over 16 educational institutions in the USA. iFrag Frag Tracker was provided for the event, and it was held in 4 stages, in the format of duels and death matches. Neither the demo recordings of the tournament nor the WAD files that were used could be found, but it is known that Columbia University from New York took first place, and one of the WODs was called IFTOUR 1.WAD. The iFrag community lasted much less than its competitors from Dwango servers and were generally gameplay more related to the local scene, the archived version of The Doctor. Funfrock's website is a monument to this small scene. It contains the stories of some players, leaderboards, and some uploaded custom maps. The commercial project Kaylee launched in the second half of March 1995, expanding the list of games including a video game Descent developed by Parallax Software and released by Interplay Productions. It became the next creation of Cotton and Coleman after iFrag. The name itself, Kali, was invented by Scott's girlfriend, later his wife. The word comes from the divine incarnation of Vishnu from Hinduism. The Kali avatar is usually depicted with swords in her hands and a necklace of skulls from those she has killed, which seemed appropriate for a deathmatch game. I had a full-time job, so I worked on Kaylee during the evenings and on weekends, in between Doom games, of course. Kaylee was straightforward to implement once I understood how an IPX network driver functions. Using a book called Programmer's Guide to Netware by Charles Rose as a reference, along with a spy program to determine empirically which IPX functions were being used, I laid out the skeleton for Kaylee in a day or so. The commercialization of Kaylee did not scare off the players of those years at all. The cost of the full version at $20 was most likely the most user-friendly network among other services. The demo version provided several free hours of play. Competitors most often used an hourly payment scheme and did not provide access until the money was transferred. For this reason, the gaming magazine Next Generation in March 1997 proclaimed Kaylee as the best service for online gaming. Scott and Jay wanted to give players the opportunity to try out the utility before they deposited money. In the summer of 1995, Scott Coleman moved to Interplay Productions. Jay Cotton creates Kali Incorporated to further develop and promote the service, including porting it to Windows 95. By the end of 1996, the number of users of the program Kali numbered about 50,000. Blizzard used Kaylee to create an online gaming session during the release of Warcraft 2 until the end of 1996. On December 31st, 1996, Battle.net will replace Kaylee services and will be used further. Besides Doom, Heretic, Warcraft 2, and Descent, Kaylee supported other IPX-connected games, including Quake, Duke Nukem 3D, Diablo, Rise of the Triad, and Command & Conquer. In the future, developers will abandon the use of the IPX protocol in their games in favor of the new and more reliable TCP/IP, and will also begin creating their own gaming platforms with their own servers: Battle.net, MSN Gaming Zone, Steam, and others. In the 2000s, Kaylee will become a gaming browser for searching online battles and will compete with its competitor GameSpy. But that's a different story. "1995 years in the Doom community marked the appearance of an increasing number of works under Doom 2, while mapping popularity for Doom 1 started to fade away. Megawads starting to appear with different authors' styles, huge influences around famous community creators regarding the level design that started the unique trend in mapping. Fava Beans, WAD, released in August 1995, was presented in the style of Episode 1 of Doom 1, probably one of the best variations, and keeping the spirit of knee-deep in the Dead episode as faithfully as possible of those years. 8 levels were made by Sean Burkle and 1 E1M5 by Ben Gates. Sean used the latest version of DEU 5.21 for a year, after which he switched to Death. In a text file to WAD, he talked about his favorite bands, how the project exhausted him, and how much more he prefers the levels for Doom, 1 over levels for Doom 2 during playing Deathmatch. Another popular total conversation during the 90s after Aliens TC was called A Fistful of Doom. A Western theme with a suitable presentation can help find its fan base, which happened with this conversation using Doom. Old West.WAD that was made on DMap Edit was popular during online tournament matches. Along with Boot Hill WAD, these two WADs were presented in the Wild West theme. However, Fistful went further than other TCs during that time, providing new textures, unique enemy sprites, objects, and weaponry from the Western era. If turn off the music composition, D run-in on the first level, you will stop identifying this WAD with Doom. New sounds will make you believe that you transferred yourself into popular spaghetti western movies that featured Clint Eastwood in his golden role as a vigilante cowboy. The plot is based on the search for the main character, so you are attacked by literally everyone except the drunken cowboys. Without a doubt, the authors of this total conversion were in the right place and at the right time. Talking about this dilogy with Latin names in separation from each other will be a bad form of tone, since these two WADs complete each other. Before the Plutonia experiment was released, the Casali brothers were famous for their earlier work, while creating Doom WADs that influenced a new, unique genre for Doom maps that will be called later slaughter maps. Difficult to say if Memento Mori was its own magnum opus for the Innocent crew. At that time, the Innocent crew team already had two episodic WADs and the controversial Obituary behind them. It's hard to give a conclusive score to Memento Mori due to the design choice reception. Some levels, despite their size, can occasionally confuse the player. A certain amount of switch hunting is also present here, making it more difficult for some players. The level balance is unforgiving and may not have been properly tested, especially for pistol start players. However, it is important to add that the authors in the description for Memento Mori and its second part indicated that the project was predisposed more towards a cooperative game than a single-player game. For example, in Memento Mori, one Map 31 technology base is only accessible to a single player in half of its progress, while in 4-player multiplayer, you can easily complete it. Dennis Mahler made his own info pack, which contained information about the plot, instructions on how to install the WAD, and behind the scenes during the development. It can be launched using the software DOS Box. You'll be greeted by a song composed by Mark Clem, which was used on Map 10 and Map 24. Mark Clem himself wrote the soundtrack for the first part of Memento Mori. During the sequel, David Shaw helped compose other tracks. At that time, the info pack format had not become something famous, but it was used in projects and went beyond simple TXT files. The plot of the first part takes place on Earth after the end of Doom 2, while the events of the second part move the player to a satellite of Jupiter. Info pack file for the sequel had a detailed description of every map level. Memento Mori 2 also contains an additional 2 levels. Before Memento Mori, this kind of interaction with PWAD files wasn't noticed. Later on, the authors of this community project will create no less legendary PWADs: Requiem, the Plutonia Experiment, TNT, Evolution, Perdition's Gate, and others. From the article on Doom World, The Roots of Doom, mapping from Not Jabi, we learn the author's opinion regarding the WADs that were released during the 1996 to 1997 years. The first projects took their creativity gameplay-wise and simple design, while other projects focused their mapping design on the environment around the player and the element of adventure, leaving battles with monsters in the background more efficient. What am I leading you to? Of course, to the SLAR maps. A WAD called Squared was released in March 1995 and presents a simple, geometric, but fully packed map with monsters. It stated that it's one of the first SLAR maps in the Doom community. The author noted that it took 25 hours to develop this map. In modern map editing software, it can take much less time, even less than an hour. Don't forget to note that in 1995, mappers used complicated software programs for map editing without the additional helpful tools in them that we have today. A WAD released during the December weekends in a Christmas theme called H2HXMAS, being simple in level design, compensates for its dynamic gameplay. Another community project where we met again an author who created a WAD called Galaxia, Pavel Hodek. In H2HXMAS, a Santa Claus decides to beat the demons on 32 levels, where you gather around yourself shotgun shells. It seems coal is out of stock. Jim Flynn was quite a famous person while Doom community was growing at the end of the 90s. In a regular lifetime, he worked as a programmer, had C and C++ experience, worked on Pascal and Fortran, had to change the places of work, including the company Intel. During his free time from the job, Jim was developing video games and was interested in Mandelbrot fractals. He updated the map editor Death by adding the ability to work with Boom Foreman. But now we remain with body of work during 1995. One of his controversial but very important projects. The Enigma episode recollects older levels that were done by Jim, created for Doom 1, later adapted for Doom 2. Along with other WADs at that time, Flynn's work was something from Parallel Universe. Long levels with non-standard architecture and fractals added as a texture, causing an effect of abstraction. Levels took enough time to beat, around 20 to 30 minutes, to complete. Amount of the puzzles balances with geometry, giving the player to uncover sort of Kubik's Rubik. Enigma is not for those who are playing Doom first time. From our perspective, it's suitable for the player who's feeling giving a challenge to unique design designed by Jim Flynn, and being die-hard fan of Doom to beat it. Other Doom WAD projects, like The Final Gathering, Nostromo's Run, and The Artifact, look like a usual levels for Doom 2. First WAD was made by Rich Johnson. It was a good start for him being a mapper. However, it didn't appear with such a fame. Later, he created some levels for Strain and HACX. Paul Schipmitz planned to release the Arfiact by a single level, but after reaching the limits, he separated the WAD into 3 parts. That's why they're related to each other, being the similar creativity of a mind. Wadamania 1995 concludes with a mention of a WAD called the Master Levels, a cult expansion pack among the Doom community released on December 26, 1995, missing a huge amount of profit from various WADs that were released on CD by a non-commercial individuals. ID Software decided to come up with an expansion pack and release it officially. Before the release of the Master Levels, some of the levels were already released on the internet. The Master Levels contained over 21 levels, which were not connected in any way with the exception of one storyline in a text file written by one of authors. Dr. Sleep, Tom Mustaine, Tim Willits, Teresa Chasar, Cranium, Kristen Cly, Jim Flynn. If it weren't for ID's concern with the topic of creating an official pack and including these levels in Final Doom on the PlayStation port, it is unlikely that anyone would remember these people now, because their maps are made in the spirit of their period. However, they are definitely not worse company to other maps from Doom 1 or Doom 2. There are both simple and fun maps, and those that were made for a puzzle solution. Fights with monsters that are unfair to the player can still cause frustration due to the lack of balance during the playtesting. The WAD itself only played by the mappers themselves during the developing. Most of these authors contributed their work in the gaming industry, releasing commercial mega games, or even getting a job position at ID Software or Ion Storm itself. It's also better to mention some levels that weren't included in Master Levels for some reason. They were rejected by the ID Software or weren't suggested. A series of maps called Cabal by Cranium, supposed to become a complete megawad. However, signing a contact to work on the expansion pack Master Levels and sending 12 maps, only 5 of them were accepted. The author will release other 7 maps later. In Cabal series, the main hero was an ex-cyber demon, which turned out to be a human after being transformed to one by his fellow demon friends. The level by the Tom Mustaine, Homage, reminded so much a map from Doom 2 called Map 14, Inmost Dens. This was a reason to reject the following level. The author released it later on his website. An interesting detail to mention, how the textures in the level reminded both levels that were rejected as well, System Control and Processing Area. Later on, they will be famous as Map 01 and Map 17 for TNT Evolution. Rejected maps made by Kristen Clee, despite being simple in a level design, couldn't leave the player without an impression. Fights with demons were small, but were recognized due to the gameplay-wise of choice that was unique charm left by the author. Unlike Cranium and his work Cabal, Kristen did not combine the levels into one episode, presenting them as independent from each other. Levels made for the series called Titan by Jim Flynn contain characteristic authorial elements. The intricacy of locations, switch hunting, abstraction, and the huge amount of time required to complete them. The 4 levels, not included in the Master Levels, are quite close to Titan Manor and Trapped on Titan in many ways. These and other projects could be met by buying a CD disc called Maximum Doom. That disc contained over 1,800 levels, of which most were already made for Doom 2. The amount of maps that were coming through and the growing number of mappers at that time couldn't be stopped. Soon, probably the largest team of mappers from the 90s appeared, which we will talk about in the next Wadamania. Among all the numerous Doom competitions held around the world in 90s, Deathmatch 95 was most similar to modern championships in popular disciplines. It is believed to be the first esports tournament. The Dwango service was involved in the organization of the tournament, which took place in several stages and affected 2 continents. The announcement for the event was posted by Dwango Bob on September 18th on Usernet, and the registration deadline was September 29th. Subsequently, Lance Lancaster, Aikman, announced on October 7th through the same network that additional players were being recruited until October 9th. Qualifiers took place in America and Great Britain. French players were supposed to participate, but for some reason, their tour did not take place. There have been 8 online qualifying rounds in the States, but the date of the first, October 7th to 8th, is controversial. If the new registration deadline was October 9th, how did the last-minute registered participants pass these same qualifying rounds then? Unfortunately, we were unable to find any tournament brackets. Each player took part from their home via modem. One of the moderators of the Dwango server in Houston, HD Rambo, said that often players had disconnects and lags. This explains the post about Aikman's additional recruiting. Only subscribers of the well-known service could participate. The winners of the 8th round advanced to the playoffs and prepared for a trip to Redmond, a suburb of Seattle, Washington. The matches were held in the best-of-3 format, time limit 5 minutes, 1 level each from the 3 games presented: Doom, Doom 2, and Heretic. The qualifying round in the UK was held in LAN format. There is much more information about it. The competition took place in HMV stores selling music CDs, films, and merchandise. Instead of the Dwango service, the local organization was handled by the PC Zone magazine, whose staff at that time included one of the future finalists of the World Tournament, David McCandless Macca. Matches took place in Manchester, Oxford, Liverpool, London, and other cities. Some were on Saturdays, some were on Sundays, from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. The grid was represented by 4 computers based on Intel Pentium 100 MHz, Map E1M, one from the Ultimate Doom, and the frag limit is at least 20. Subsequently, the 8 selected winners went to London, Oxford Street, to the largest HMV store on October 22nd. Each of the regional finalists received the entire catalog of games from the publisher GT Interactive, the Ultimate Doom, Doom 2, Mortal Kombat, a Doom-style screensaver for Windows 3.1, and other stuff. The UK final round also included Doom 2 and Heretic in addition to the Ultimate Doom. The list of maps included Dead Simple, ID Map 01, Heretic E1M1, DM2, NIN, and specially prepared Seattle with SEM Final. Except duels in the finals of the qualifying round, the main mode was Deathmatch, where each round, the 2 players with the fewest frags were eliminated. Frag limit ranged from 20 to 30. The first place was taken by a player from Norway, Cranium. Some people know him for the levels he created for Master Levels. As a reward for defeating all opponents, he was given a trip to the final part of the World Tournament in Seattle. Brian Daw, who lost the podium, did not come to the States for unknown reasons. The second participant from England was David McCandless, who, according to the information he provided, was a judge at the qualifiers. Redmond is a small town near Seattle with a population of 42,000 people. However, Microsoft moved its office here from Albuquerque in 1986, but that's not about them now. Judgment Day was a sort of a Halloween party that got out of control in terms of its size. It hosted a conference for video game developers as well as various entertainment events for the general public. Significant events included the release of Hexen Beyond Heretic from Raven Software and the legendary video with Bill Gates and a shotgun was shown. The final part of the Deathmatch 95 tournament was played on the new source port for Doom from Microsoft, Doom 95, which was also a brilliant presentation of DirectX technology for Windows 95. According to the Doom wiki, the matches were played in the best-of-1 format, time limit 5 minutes, mode, alt-death, skill 4. The Games Master TV program and the PC Zone article by David McCandless indicate that one match was played in best-of-3 format. The last source fully describes this event as a total turmoil. While Alex Street, John entertained the audience on the main stage dressed as a horned creature. The tournament itself took place in more modest conditions. The computer club was located in the garage based on Kushner's data and photographs. Long waits between matches, technical problems. For example, example, a player under the nickname Kreutzen used a trackball instead of a mouse, the drivers of which were unstable on the latest operating system and the Doom 95 port. Most likely, he lost in the match with Stony, who then challenged Thresh in the very final match of the tournament. David noted serious problems with the operation of the peripherals, especially with the sound. Many people mistakenly believe that Marlock, one of the favorites of the Doom scene, lost first place to Fong, but that was only the semi-final. However, a broken keyboard and a dropped chair occurred after the defeat of the future owner of Carmack's car. All battles took place in Doom, Doom 2, and Heretic. The final battle took place in Hexen on the first map. A demo of the game was presented to the finalists shortly before its release. Dennis Fong had defeated Stony with a score of 8-0 and went down in history as the first e-sportsman. But the Deathmatch 95 tournament was only the beginning of his stellar career. Jay Wilbur personally congratulated the participants of the event. Thresh was awarded for the first place with a 1-year VIP subscription to the Dwango service, the latest computer based on a fresh Intel Pentium, and a lifetime opportunity to receive ID software games for free. Stony was awarded for the second place with a 6-month subscription to online battles, a sound and video card, and a joystick. The remaining participants in the final bracket were given a copy of Hexen and the opportunity to play for free on the Dwango service for 3 months. Unfortunately, no tournament demos can be found. It is likely that they were simply not recorded. Yet Alex Street John, the same person responsible for DirectX and the shotgun in the hands of Bill Gates, posted a half-hour video clip from this event on his YouTube channel recently. More details about Judgment Day can be found in David Kushner's book Masters of Doom. The first tournaments are considered a series of events at Austin Virtual Gaming in Austin, Texas. On the second floor above the coffee shop, zoology students organized their computer club with an hourly rate of $8. It is likely that no one will remember these tournaments now, but John Romero and Sean Green showed up twice. On May 7th, the Duel Championship takes place in the double elimination format. The maps from the game were randomly selected from the episode Knee Deep in the Dead. The time limit was 20 minutes. During which the player with the most frags won. Cash contributions ranged from $5 to $15. The final match were played by the players in FFA format. On June 18th, a 2-on-2 team deathmatch was held in the double elimination format. Cash contributions ranged from $8 to $16. The maps were played according to the same rules as in the first tournament. According to visitors, there were from 20 to 50 spectators, and there was even a camera sent by a local television company to document what was happening. Unfortunately, the material could not be found. However, screenshots of the demo version of Doom 2 shown by John Romero at that championship were posted online. All information was obtained from the Usenet network. The book Lords of Doom mentioned only one tournament in this establishment. Doomsday Party was a party celebrating the upcoming release of Doom 2, Hell on Earth, which took place at the Limelight nightclub, formerly the Cathedral of the Blessed Sacrament, in New York City on October 10, 1994. The event was organized by TSI Communications, which Doom's publishers, GT Interactive, hired at that time. A limited number of invitations were sent to visitors, but the selection criteria are unknown. Most likely, they were for representatives of the press or friends of ID employees themselves. The nightclub itself was decorated with Gothic decorations, which together resembled a house of horrors. A holographic projector installed near the entrance depicted monsters from Doom, and the soundtrack from the game played in the background from the establishment's sound system. All that is known about the tournament itself is that it was held in alt-death mode, with matches of 4 players. The winners received gold medals. The remaining prizes are unknown. Among them were journalists Jeff Kitts and Dan Amrich. A fateful meeting was held between the creators of the Dwango service and John Romero. According to DoomWiki, the event attracted protesters against violence in video games, which they believe can lead to violence in real life. However, it all ended in a verbal conflict between the townfolk on one side and Jay Wilbur and Sean Green on the other. Unfortunately, there are only 2 photographs from the event with Romero, as well as photographs of the Kitts gold medal and the Amrich badge. The editors authors of 3 decades of Doom were unable to find any video material. One can only guess whether anything has survived from this event, which had a budget of about $2 million. Doomsday 95 was a Doom 2 championship in Switzerland. It was organized on March 19, 1995 in the city of Bern. About 180 people attended to the event from 10:30 a.m. to 8 p.m. According to some opinions, this is the first gathering of a group of enthusiasts who will continue gatherings under the auspices of Netgame. Only one photo on the internet regarding this event, the badge that a certain Frank Hoffman won at this championship. Nothing is known about the tournament except for the created map, which probably served as a deathmatch arena. Doomsday. In the fall of 1996, a series of DMCon tournaments took place. The tournament bracket, and more importantly, the match recordings from the first competition have been preserved. Only photographs survived from the second DMCon. The September tournament was held from September 22nd to 23rd in the office of the father of one of the players under the nickname Slasher. On the first day, matches were set on D2M1 and Slasher won. On the second day, matches were set on D5M1 and Ron Bob took the lead. Both days, the tournament brackets were in the single elimination format. Just a month later, a second event will be organized in Ames, Iowa, at the office of a local internet service provider. It is known that one day there will be a D2M1 tournament in which Galliu will beat the previous D2M1 champion, Slasher. Later, this small group of people will gather repeatedly in Virginia and other countries, in Canada and even in Norway. One of the participants in this local community, Laura Herman Bodko, will create one of the most significant sites in the Doom community, Doom2.net, which will become a kind of monument to the players of the early period. Andres Johnson and Adam Higgy helped her create the site. A huge number of demo recordings of matches, descriptions of LAN parties, various levels and utilities, links to other copyright sites, and much more. The most exciting section for our editors was the historical timeline section, which sets out the author's view of the periods of the community until the mid-2000s. Another section that may attract attention is the memorial page, dedicated to players who have passed on to another world. In addition to players with Dwango and Kali, some preferred to communicate with opponents via modem without using game services. One of the strongest players of those years, and probably Thresh's most serious competitor, could have been No Skill, aka Chris Crosby. However, Chris was not a Dwango subscriber. The first QuakeCon took place from August 15th to 18th, 1996 at the Best Western Hotel near Dallas, where the id Software office is located. This event was organized by Doom and Quake fans from the Number Quake IRC chat and Number QuakeCon on FNet. After learning about the Gamers Gathering, ID employees and John Carmack helped with the logistics of the event and actively communicated with visitors who brought their computers to the large hotel room. The number of visitors at first was approximately 30 people. By the end of the event, about 100. The main initiators among gamers were Jim Elson, H2HMUD, an employee of Wraith Corporation and the author of several maps for H2HXMS, and Yossarian Holmberg, Yasmin from Canada. Deathtag, Dogtag, Dwango Tag is the same fictional game mode as Team Deathmatch, which arose before the appearance of the first resource ports that brought new features to the game for real. This game mode was developed by Lance Lancaster, known as Aikman, and Craig Wessel, Talon, in 1995. It was launched for the first time on the Dwango server in Dallas. John Romero himself was among the first players to try it out. The Deathtag mode selection feature did not exist at server launch, so players simply selected Deathmatch instead. It's difficult to call this mode a prototype of Capture the Flag because because there were no specialized items on the map, flags or skulls that needed to be captured and brought to your base. Then how did people play it? Deathtag could be played 1 versus 1. In one of the text files, this option was called frog tag, or 2 versus 2. 4 is the maximum number of players in Vanilla Doom's multiplayer. Division into teams could happen in advance in a chat, or it could be said out loud at the LAN party. At the beginning of the match, all players appeared in a room with teleporters, which determined the teams. At this moment, an additional division took place within the team itself into a runner and a player who is responsible for pressing the button. After the teleport room, players entered the main gameplay area. The first task deemed was to press a button that allowed the runner to access the anti-radiation suit and teleport. The second task is for the runner to run through a section of the map that is inaccessible to the first player, where the acid floor causes damage of 20 health units at short intervals. It's worth remembering a funny feature of the game. Acid occasionally causes damage through a protective suit, so an accident could occur if your health was low. At the end of the path, the runner meets the treasured button or finish line. Crossing it gives the team 1 point. It was displayed as a change in an additional texture in the form of a number on the corresponding scoreboard, or as a rise in a sector the size of a small column. When one of the teams scored 5 points, the match ended by pressing the exit button. Pressing this button prematurely has been prohibited. The third task was to actively prevent the opposing team from picking up weapons, a suit, and especially gaining points. Frags in this mode did not have much value, but players still had to destroy their opponents with a rocket launcher. This kind of team game required more concentration than a regular deathmatch. However, the map authors added a mode switch to the first location, which made it possible to block the area with acid, giving players the opportunity to play for frags the old-fashioned way. The reason why Deathtag is sometimes called Dwango tag or dog tag is because of the release of WADs and map packs of the same name, similar to the usual parts of the Dwango series. Some viewers may be familiar with the Judas level series by Brian Venata, but few people know that there was a Judas 22 map that was specifically created by Brian for Deathtag. Some authors have tried to go beyond the boundaries set by Aikman and Talon. For example, Tom Mustaine and his Wadi Mountain King offered the ability to display a personal score rather than a team score. There is no location with acid. There is no need to find a protective suit. The player only needs to climb the mountain and press the lever. Upon reaching 5 points, the player needs to click on the final switch and complete the map. T-Veer and his WAD, 3 guys with guns, offered a variation of Deathtag for 3 players, where everyone fought for themselves. There is a green, gray, and brown player's fort. Everyone's task is to unlock the protective suit, and, after running across the lava, press the desired lever in the form of a skull. Upon reaching 5 points, the match still ended by pressing the exit button. The well-known clan Unidoom, in its first collection of competitive maps, UDM, one also added 2 maps under Deathtag by Dean Joseph, also known as a Deathzor. However, this happened at the end of the mode's popularity when it was already actively being replaced by the new Capture the Flag. Deathtag definitely had some popularity in the 90s, especially with players looking for team-based play options. In fact, new game modes in Doom only appeared with the advent of breakthrough source ports. At present, Deathtag game mode unfortunately is forgotten. Unfortunately, determining the origins of the Doom community in other countries is quite a difficult task. In the post-Soviet case, nobody knows exactly when it started in CIS countries. If in the USA community was born from the Doom Alpha releases, in the East, Europe community was definitely born much later. Instead of Usenet, post-Soviet gamers preferred to use Fidone. The Dwango online gaming service was never present in CIS countries. There were some reasons for that. At first, It was very expensive to host the servers due to the deplorable economic situation after the collapse of the USSR. Plus, the older generation was thinking that video games are useless toys for kids and don't deserve such investments to handle online gaming. They were naturally more concerned about finding essentials to survive in crisis times. However, there was a central hub for Russian Doom players, the Fedonets Echo Mail, aka public message boards, ru.game Doom. Unfortunately, it is impossible to find the whole backup of those message boards, but archives from 1995 to 1997 were found in a Doom file collection made by user Makel_Russia. It contained 5 archives of source ports, WADs, demo files, and editing tools. Posts from 1997 onwards can be found at groups.google.com. It is impossible to say how exactly Doom got into the post-Soviet territory. Maybe it was floppy disks brought from the Baltic countries, or someone gave away a hard drive with installed game files, or maybe the data was encrypted in parts in the UUE format. But don't think that Russian-speaking players didn't know what was going on in the Western Doom scene. Russians have known about the existence of Dwango 5 or Judas 21 WADs. They heard about Deathtag mode, and they are aware about map editors like DEU, Death, DCK. Dragon can be considered as one of the pioneers of the Doom scene in Russia. He was one of the first players who used a mouse to play Doom. It's worth making a clarification here. In CIS countries, there were big holy wars between keyboard-only players and mouse users. Of course, sometime later, the release of the first Quake forced keyboard-only players to buy a mouse and play with it. But at first, many people believed that the keyboard was enough to play Doom perfectly. In those years, Old West WAD was quite popular everywhere. It was the Wild West themed, like the Fistful Doom WAD, but levels were designed exactly for deathmatch, and they were not so exciting as Fistful levels does. Dragon rebalanced the maps and renamed the WAD from Old West to Old East for one purpose: to have more varied gameplay in alt-death game mode. The case is that players from St. Petersburg were constantly sorting things out with their opponents from Moscow at the championships. St. Petersburg players always preferred the alt-death game mode. Moscow players always preferred the regular deathmatch. Of course, things could not be done without compromise, and this is clearly visible from the chronicles of some competitions. There is very little information about the first Doom tournament in Moscow and its exact location. It is known that it took place in September 1994. Now, this may seem extremely strange, but the tournament also used a single-player mode along with deathmatch. The qualifying round required to beat the knee-deep in the Dead episode on Hurt Me Plenty difficulty. Not only the completion time was taken into account, but also the quality of run, that is, the number of kills/items/secrets. 64 players with the best result were allowed into the final round, because the number of applicants in those years could be more than 100 people. The competition used 4 computers based on a 486 processor for 16 groups of 4 people. The second major tournament is better known. It was held as part of the International Festival of Computer Graphics and Animation Anigraph 95 at the International Trade Center in Krasnaya Presnya. The tournament itself was sponsored by Multimedia Club and SBG Magazine. The qualifying round was carried out by identifying the best run of Map 0, one of the second Doom, on Hurt Me Plenty skill. The final round was on the same map in alt-death mode. Time limit was 10 minutes. A little less than 200 people came to the championship. That competition used 8 computers based on DX266 processors with mediocre sound settings and not the best video cards. Luckily, that SBG magazine digitized their second issue, so the final tour demos were saved. The winners were given a choice of gamepads from Advanced Gravis Computer Technology and sound cards. The first tournament in St. Petersburg was held on June 17, 1995. It was a trial championship, which later became a monthly championship in St. Petersburg for online computer games. But the most famous tournament was captured on a VHS camera, thereby becoming the perfect representation of that era. The recording clearly shows how many people attended this event, how the registration took place, which control layouts were used, what maps were played, and you can feel the atmosphere in general. It is unlikely that even one conversation or correspondence can convey this. On September 22, 1996, Open Here Cup 1.03 was held in the rented premises of the Askad Eureka Computer Company. The organizers were Vorch and Lazy. The first had a good relationship with the organization, the second worked directly in it, after which there were several more similar tournaments, as the management appreciated the great interest in this event. Registration was announced at 11 a.m. Matches themselves began an hour later. A total of 88 people turned up, where judging resulted in 24 players being selected for the next meeting in November at the same location. At the qualifying tournament, people played GS1, Dwango 5, Map 01, Round, and other WADs. The final round took place on November 9th on the flipped maps of Arena 2, Yards, Yoj, Dwango 5 Map 01, and Danzig 1 Map 12. In addition to the St. Petersburg residents themselves, players from Moscow, Kaluga, or even Magadan, as well as from the countries of the former Soviet republics, could routinely show up for such shootouts in Doom. What about our neighbors? The first Latvian championship in 1995 will bring together about 50 players and will be held in 3 stages. Among the prizes were a Gravis gamepad and a SmartLink 19200 modem. The 1995 championship in Kiev was held in 2 rounds, with the support of a company called Global Ukraine, and gathered around more than 200 people. Along with Kiev, competitions were also held in Kharkov. If we dig up and talk about the tournaments in the CIS countries at the time, then we're unlikely to fit into a 2-hour time frame.
Здесь, Пашка, выходи. Ты где?
Мясо, мясо летит просто мясо.
Думерская кошка. Имп.
There are a small number of WADs from Russian mappers from a specific 3-year period that have survived to this day. Lost Square by Benjamin Chukalov is a seemingly simple castle that is guarded by imps, but the path to some locations is not so obvious. This WAD a bit reminiscent of Jim Flynn's first Enigma maps. Unfortunately, nothing is known about the author himself. Do 22 is somewhat reminiscent of maps from the master levels. The author, under the nickname Nicholas Memphis, also forced players to look for ways to pass Map 01 and did not lead them by hand. The same cannot be said about the more driving Map 02, where finding one of the secrets makes the player's life much easier. The Deathmatch level, railway track from SOAR, can hardly be called a suitable arena for battles with each other. Using the rocket launcher, you can control the main corridor here. The following map from this author with Old Nick may amuse you with additional textures. In addition, Micro Machines 2 is much more suitable for Deathmatch. Dmitry Tsiapa and his 2 levels called Higher 8 were hardly in demand on LAN-Parties. One of them will be added to the famous map collection, The Impact, Dewad, but in the next decade. The Trepidation terrain and the Damned City, from the submission of 3 authors, Archvile, Samiel, and Vandal, look quite simple at the time of 1996. DCK and Deep editors were used to create those maps. Like in the USA, some local players, after the decline in Doom's popularity, became employees of the gaming industry. Archvile took part in projects such as Killer Tank, collaborated with Namco and Bethesda. Dragon, who recreated the metro station Electrosila from St. Petersburg to Doom, would later work for Medea Entertainment on the games called Echelon and Echelon 2, Wind Warriors. It is worth noting one point. Such large tournaments with this huge activity in this part of the world took place somewhat later than those held on the North American continent. If it weren't for the ru.game.doom archives and communication with players of those years, it would hardly have been possible to get so much information. But what happened to the post-Soviet community after 1996? Fan meetings will become more local and will be carried out in emerging computer clubs across the country. At the same time, the number of Russian WADs and personal websites about Doom will increase, so attention to the game will not fade away completely. 5 years later, there will be created one of the most important forums for the Russian-speaking community, the Doom Power.
– 24 и 25 мая в учебно-производственном комбинате состоялся первый городской чемпионат по компьютерной игре Doom. Подробнее об этом в репортаже Андрея Ярошевского.
It's better to start with Wadamania 1996, mentioning the most popular team of mappers and modders from the Doom community during that era, Team TNT. Most gamers from the 90s period were aware of their work. The team was formed during the Usenet group led by the leader and webmaster of Team TNT, Ty Halderman. There were two divisions within the team, Alpha and Beta. Some, when creating the WAD, advocated preserving classic Doom, while others, on the contrary, were drawn towards modding. Team TNT planned to release their opus at midnight on October 25th, 1995. However, a few hours earlier, John Romero sent a letter to Halderman with a proposal to include their project in the official release from ID Software for subsequent sale. Within an hour, they were discussing this business proposal on IRC. According to Dario Casali, the TNT in the name originally stood for Trials and Tribulations, and only later, the new technology, which reflects the name of the Team TNT development team that created the WAD. Some of its levels were removed from the release version of Evolution due to disagreements in gameplay. The Casali brothers insisted on their own, giving more preference to whirlwind gameplay. The rest of the TNT team put the level itself before fighting monsters. Casali brothers made the Plutonia experiment as a combination of reflection and a desire to create something different from Evolution. Even before their magnum opus was completed, 10 maps were finished, some of which were thrown out of TNT, were sent to Sean Green. After a positive reaction, they received an offer to make 22 maps in 6 weeks, and then they would get the green light for a second project under the name Final Doom. The map slots in the Evolution Megawad also needed to be filled in somehow, so the release of the commercial release from ID was delayed and came out literally before Quake 1. Many fans waiting for the project to be freely available were infuriated by the information about its commercialization. During the collaboration with ID, a price tag was placed on the Megawad, which caused at least frustration and, at most, attempts to boycott the product. The plot of TNT Evolution is built around a surviving Marine who finds himself in the middle of an infantry base on one of the moons of Jupiter, where a vast, hellish ship made of stone, steel, flesh, and bones suddenly arrives. By pure chance, the hero is the last survivor and must deal with the demons. The musical accompaniment from Jonathan L. Bizri, Josh Martell, Leo Sieben, and Tom Mustaine is well done. The WAD puts a lot of emphasis on level exploration, but it also tries to remember the gameplay. The maps vary greatly in detail. Who knows what the project would have been like if Casali had remained among the authors, and what would Evolution look like if Romero had not written a letter proposing cooperation. Evolution was the work of a large team. The Plutonia experiment was only made by Dario and Milo Casali. You can, of course, bring in the indirect influence of Team TNT, but WAD was made exclusively by the Casali brothers. The story takes place after Doom 2, where the UAC prevents the forces of Hell from re-invading after reorganizing itself. The mentioned quantum accelerator in the plot does a great job keeping a portal until, at one point, there were too many portals. Here, the player is sent to a particular place to protect UAC's scientific developments from demons. While going through Megawad levels, you will unlikely remember the plot, but the battles with monsters will not leave you indifferent. In contrast to TNT, Casali's opus focuses exclusively on gameplay. Players who completed Final Doom always valued one half above the other. However, each of them was important for subsequent Megawads and certainly left a significant mark on the community's history. Some may think that they have not stood the test of time, while others will see in them an ideal historical cast of those years. The choice is up to the player who wants to familiarize himself. Final Doom could likely contain a third Megawad. Bob and Tom Mustaine originally developed Perdition's Gate. They approached Sean Green about possibly adding their project to an upcoming collection from ID Software. Later, they understood that the work would not be included in the release. Tom and Bob soon contacted Jim Elson, H2H, who worked for the Wraith Corporation on Hell to Pay and H2H Xmas, before Perdition's Gate became a commercial release and eventually acquired the rights to Atari. A demo version with 11 levels was released as part of the CD compilation D-Zone Gold. The question of posting the full version online remains open, since it is simply impossible to buy a Megawad. Perdition's Gate is thematically divided into 3 episodes: Earth, the World of the Ancients, and the Planet of Hell, and in addition to the Mustaines, Jim Elson, Jimmy Sebin, and McKee McCandlish worked on the levels. The music was handled by Tom Mustaine and Leo Sebin, who also took part in creating the soundtrack for TNT Evolution. Dynamic gameplay, a storyline presented as text between cards, and the author's more conscious approach to the project helped it become one of the most memorable megawads of the mid-90s. If not for the abandonment of ID to commerce it, perhaps Perdition's Gate could have become something connecting in spirit between TNT and Plutonia, but we will never know. The planned sequel to Evolution from Team TNT was released several months before the release of Final Doom under a completely different name, Icarus: Alien Vanguard. Icarus is a 32-level megawad containing many new textures and original music. The cards ended the same way via teleportation to the ship when receiving the red key, except for the final level. The action takes place on the ship Icarus, which aliens capture. Periodically, the player teleports to different planets or even finds himself in virtual reality. But the ship levels most closely match their description. Even though Megawad is a community project, it evokes a sense of integrity and looks like an example for young mappers of those years. At the end of 1994, at CompuServe Action Games, a large gaming forum dedicated to PC games, another modding team dedicated to Doom, Team Eternal, began to gather under the auspices of Jim Flynn and John Anderson. Then, they started their first project, Eternal Doom. However, the development of this WAD only got off the ground for a long time until the previous project leaders were replaced by Paul Schmitz, under whose leadership the project began to gain momentum. The first part of Eternal Doom contained 12 levels, new textures, music, sounds, and graphics. Cranium worked on the textures, but some were taken from Heretic and Hexen. The length of the maps significantly exceeds any of the iWads, and it takes at most 20 minutes to complete them. The number and complexity of puzzles also go beyond the background of the original Doom. The plot is based on time travel. Demons decided to eradicate humanity by moving to the Middle Ages, and a brave Marine followed them. Moreover, the first episode starts from the technology base, where the player has yet to get to the time machine. Unlike the Memento Mori series, we will take a slightly different narrative path. You will find out what ultimately happened to this project and what fate was in store for Team Eternal in the subsequent years of Wadamania. In addition to the creations of Kasali, Team TNT, and the Innocent Crew, the Curious WAD was released in 1996. It demonstrated 3D bridges and the imitation of diving underwater for the first time. We are talking about Dystopia 3, made by Anthony Cherwonka under the nickname Adillusion from Chicago and Ika Karinen from Finland. They became members of the Alpha Dog Alliance team, but this event affects the time frame of our next Wadamania. In 1996, the duo released 11 levels for Doom 2, featuring a helipad, an overturned car, an aircraft, and even an actual race for survival with a timer. Interaction with opponents occurs relatively dynamically, up to skirmishes in close spaces. Although Dystopia 3 did not become as iconic as Final Doom, it was difficult not to notice it among other WADs of 1996. Also in 96, the Troopers Playground was released by mapper from Germany Matthias Warch, who, after him, as well as the cult Megawad Requiem and mapping for Quake, would end up at Epic Games and work on the Unreal Engine, moving to Northern California. The Troopers Playground was added to the list of add-ons for Doom on Unity on November 30th, 2023. Map 06 appeared in the role of Map 09 in Requiem. The SS enemies were replaced with the help of Dehacked by angry paratroopers who attacked in bursts. The architecture of the maps with driving gameplay will leave various traps and a meeting with a new enemy in your memory. The total conversion of Army of Darkness was based on the film of the same name, Army of Darkness, directed by Sam Raimi. The authors tried to realize an alternative ending to the third part of The Evil Dead, using developments from the WAD Excalibur by Stefan Meis. The final result was quite controversial. There are enemy sprites from Hexen replacing monsters from Doom, a shotgun using the double-barreled shotgun sprite from Doom 2, a catapult, a rifle, and so on. Raimi movie props may amuse players, but has this WAD-y stood the test of time? You have to find the answer yourself by playing it. This was just a quick tour of the 1996 WADs. It will become more difficult to single out projects every year because their quantity will continue to grow along with their quality. This was the early days of the Doom community. Almost from the very release of the game, it received incredibly huge attention from both fans and the media, thereby making it a cultural phenomenon. The word Doom has long become a household word and connects an unimaginable number of people all over the planet. However, after 1996, the popularity of the game will begin to fade due to the release of increasingly new and technologically advanced games. Doom as a discipline will disappear at the upcoming QuakeCon 1997 and other events. However, the most dedicated fans, taking advantage of the open source code provided by John Carmack, will create the first source ports that overcome the limitations of the original game. Consequently, the quality of various pedo WADs will increase rapidly. One of the most important websites will be created, which will become a centralization point for players from many countries. The transition from paid services Dwango and Kaylee to the first network source ports will be an equally significant moment in the history of the community. The next stop will be the period from 1997 to 2000. However, this project requires a huge amount of time and effort. Therefore, the 3 decades of Doom editorial team will take a break. See you again.